Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Continuing our theme of modernization, we're going to be talking with our panel today about practical applications for modern insurance technologies and bringing those to market as rapidly as we can in today's urgency. We got some perspectives from our panel of luminaries and experts with very diverse roles and experience across insurance and the technologies that have the potential to change everything yet again. Certainly the questions we face today is sped up with the clock in terms of the clock with respect to when we need some of these promises that emerging technologies are here to deliver. Big challenges require big thinking, and as we heard from Joan and Vince Cerf earlier this morning, distilling them down to the simple solutions are what's really necessary to have transformative effect and allowing the entire industry and really society to build upon them. So let's talk about with our experts about what's ready to get practical. There might be some real change to be coming out of this episode here for insurance. So we'll talk first about the technologies today. We'll talk a bit about the open source and community options there as we seek broader impact. And then, of course, the data that we all work with that drives our desired applications of future technology. We'll do a quick intro of each of our panelists, and then we'll get into some questions. If you're looking at this through a browser, there's a link down below to submit questions. And through the VME app, you can also do that as well. We are doing this live, so please try out this interactive TV thing. And we'll keep our fingers crossed to make sure to limit our technical difficulties, and let's get started. So first, I want to introduce Mark Breeding, partner and chief research officer at Strategy Meets Action. Mark is well known for his perspectives on the future of the insurance industry and innovative uses of technology in insurance. His specialty areas include insurtech, transformational technologies, innovation, and digital strategies. Mark has consistently been ranked as one of the top 50 global influencers in insurtech by Insurtech News. Thanks, Mark, for joining us and offering your perspectives on the technologies in insurance today and as a service that we at AAIS leverage and value ourselves from Strategy Meets Action. Thank you.
Thanks, Truman.
Next, I'm proud to welcome Brian Bellendorf. Brian is the executive director of the Hyperledger Foundation, a Linux Foundation project for open source enterprise blockchain solutions. AAIS leverages Hyperledger's Fabric blockchain solution at the core of OpenIDL for our private data trust architecture. Brian was a primary developer of the Apache web server, the most popular web server on the internet, as a founding member of the Apache Software Foundation. He also served on the board of the Mozilla Foundation since 2003, the Electronic Frontier Foundation since 2013. He was a founding CTO of CollabNet and CTO of the World Economic Forum. As a technologist for some time myself, thank you for all you've done so far. And without the work of folks like Vince Cerf and yourself, we wouldn't even be able to have this distance opportunity to have the virtual main event. Welcome, Brian, and thanks for joining us with your unique perspective on open systems and transformative infrastructure.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
And the latest addition to our panel, we're very proud to welcome Brian Hoffman, Vice President of State and Regulatory Affairs for, I'm very proud to say, as you may have heard Ed say this morning, AAIS's newest member and regulatory reporting insurance company, Travelers Insurance. As a veteran of Travelers, Brian is responsible for data operations and technical interactions with regulators, working with regulators across business units within Travelers and partners like AAIS. Brian has been deeply involved with us in the development of OpenIDL over the last 2 years, and it's greatly shaped by his input. Brian, thanks to you and Travelers and on behalf of all of us at AAIS, both for joining us today, and we're excited to welcome you to the AAIS family. Thanks for bringing your experience today.
Yeah, Truman, glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great. So I think we've got a great place to get started. So Mark, I'd like to start with you. Your research and work with many companies across insurance, technology, and those around the industry and involved in it like AAIS and the regulators to build and offer a unique perspective about how these technologies are recognized, absorbed, and really adopted across the industry. We've been kicking the tires of technologies like AI and machine learning, blockchain, IoT, different automation and robotic solutions, everything from chatbots to really anything we can come up with from on your smartphone, pushing on regulators and companies for a change and really a new experience. And I think what you often write about is when insurtech is going to become normal. What are your research and clients report on the status and visions for some of these emerging technologies?
Well, as you know, Truman, we track a really wide range of transformational technologies. We track so many transformational technologies. It's a really exciting time in the world and in insurance as well. And of course, we're looking at more common technologies like drones and wearables, but others like 5G that's starting to come online and augmented reality and even technologies like quantum computing. But when we think about, which technologies are kind of the foundational technologies that are going to fuel the transformation of the insurance industry, it's really this little graphic that I put together here. And when you think about it, the Internet of Things, the connected world, attaching sensors to everything that we insure is generating more and more data, right? Then you need blockchain to validate that data and securely exchange it among parties. And then ultimately you want, AI and machine learning type technologies to analyze that data and act on it. So certainly there's lots of other technology, a lot happening in the user interaction space, many other areas, autonomous vehicles we could talk about, but really at the heart of it, I think it's these three technologies that are the fundamental part of the infrastructure that's going to really result in new ecosystems and really change the industry.
Thanks, Mark. That's really a great picture of how things fit together and how all these technologies we're using and beginning to use, like AI and certainly IoT and the prevalence of those everywhere, and really how blockchain fits together to bring that in. So that's a great cue for Brian Bellendorf. Obviously, that's where Hyperledger fits in terms of OpenIDL and where we fit in there and how that builds on your prior work. Folks in our audience may not be familiar with some of the names I dropped in your brief intro there, like Apache, Linux, and Mozilla, just as a few examples. As a technologist, these are what I would say epic level infrastructure components, and certainly the organizations that have paved the way for allowing us to deliver what we have here today. For folks on the call and joining us online, if you're not familiar with some of those names like Apache and Linux, you use them every day. We're using them right now. And with every web page load and application and app interaction, and through this call, if you're using a browser, that still uses Mozilla technology underneath the hood. Brian, could you take a moment and provide a background on the Linux Foundation and Hyperledger organizations, their missions? And don't be shy about where folks might be interacting with your work without even knowing it as part of the infrastructure we use today.
Sure. Going back to the beginning of a lot of this, the Apache Software Foundation was started in 1998, about 3 years after the Apache web server project started, and it was really at a time at the beginning of the web where being able to set up a website was pretty inexpensive, where you could run a website from any computer, a desktop computer, that sort of thing. There wasn't really a cloud infrastructure moment at that point, and really at that time on the internet, all software was free because that was the easiest way for all the researchers, people including Vint and people involved in Berkeley Standard Unix and others, to be able to work simultaneously on the standards and on an implementation that proved that the standard was practical and viable and could be adopted quickly. And so that was kind of the world that I grew up in, was where you just naturally, as you wrote software, you shared it with others so that they could help you find your bugs, they could add features to it, but mostly so you could make sure that it was something that worked at internet scale. For no matter what internet scale meant in 95, still there was this sense it was going to be bigger, right? And that way of working together on the common technologies so that you could build kind of better value on top, what seemed to be a pretty scalable approach. And it's something that with web servers was obvious. There was a huge industry to build, providing services and add-on products around the core HTTP and HTML standards. But that even was building on top of DNS and SMTP and all these other foundational standards. And as time has gone on, this thing, which became open source, actually the term came out in '98, grew to encompass really the rest of the technology industry, right? This idea that in any technology stack, there's a line below which it makes sense to be commodity, to collaborate with your customers, perhaps even your competitors, on common technology, and then compete on the layer above, was a repeatable pattern, made sense, and that line, would go up over time as technologies matured, and just like building a skyscraper, right? And so in the early 2000s, the Linux Foundation got its start, partly to address the same kinds of concerns around the Linux operating system, which was, so far this seems to be working with this really brilliant guy, Linus Torvalds, managing this far-flung network of contributors coming from all sorts of different places. But there started to be real questions when the industry started to adopt Linux around, who who really controls the IP, and IP meaning copyright, but also patent, even trademark. There was a company that got LNUX as its stock ticker symbol, right? And people started to get really concerned about, am I piling into something that's actually common, or something that one company is going to benefit more exclusively from than the rest of the industry? And so the Linux Foundation got its start really to manage the Linux kernel project, but also the commercial ecosystem that started to emerge around Linux, and help support both. I'll make sure both could be on a steady trajectory that created the most societal value, but also the most commercial value for everybody adopting these technologies. And over time, it became clear that model was actually replicatable to other adjacent technology domains. So over time, we saw the launch of initiatives in cloud containerization. That's the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, in using these kinds of technologies in automotive and financial services and that sort of thing, all of those emerging as Linux Foundation projects. And for roughly 4.5 years ago, Hyperledger got its start to try to address this emerging new field around blockchain technology, but really distributed ledger technology, but making that work for enterprises using this model. And so the LF these days is very much into running this crank of, are there other technology domains where we can pull together a set of stakeholders to work on a common platform, commonly licensed, open source license, commonly built, but with just enough bureaucracy, just enough kind of central coordination to make it scale to the widest possible audience.
Hopefully some folks are hearing some echoes of some of the principles of insurance in there. We talk about shared risk, common goals, and mutual assurance and collaboration towards building an infrastructure and framework to solve this problem that goes beyond one policy company or insurance company. Thanks, Brian. I think it's clear that what an investment in Hyperledger, and when that's successful, might that do for enterprise blockchain and the insurance industry as some infrastructure. We'll definitely be talking more about that as we go. Brian Hoffman from Travelers. As I noted at the beginning, and thanks again, Travelers AAIS newest member company, and as a respected, forward-thinking company in the industry, we're really proud to have been selected for this trusted role as your stat agent, which is your intermediary to regulators for data, especially among the shifting priorities we have in this chaotic 2020 already. Before we get too much into the weeds of the technologies, can you tell folks a little bit about your role at Travelers and maybe what prompted this move? And what you're maybe looking for, especially now with all that's going on?
Sure, Truman. But first, I have to say, you guys are pulling off an unbelievable virtual event. So just a little backstory here for everybody that's listening and watching. We really agreed that we would be part of this yesterday. And, so there's a lot of prep that usually has to go on for a normal conference. And so I was, texting back and forth with Truman, and, Truman, he is just calm, cool, and collective. And, I'm asking, how do I get in? What do I do? He said, Brian, don't worry. I'm going to send you the link. You're going to get in. And wouldn't you know, 15 minutes before this started, we all connected. Everything was working. And it's great. So kudos to everybody at AAIS. Great job here. So thank you. It's great to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to interact with first this unbelievable panel that's here. I feel like hopefully I can contribute a nugget here or there. But right now, I would say, I feel like a deputy COVID officer at Travelers. I mean, with the amount of regulatory bulletins, orders, positions, so many different things coming from all the states, probably for the past 6-8 weeks, we have just been inundated with that. And it's been an incredible opportunity, I think, to learn so many different things that we may never had the opportunity. So out of some a very serious situation, some good things do come from it. So I say this because the group that I'm part of, we're within an actuarial group, and so we are in some ways very front lines all this from the actuarial perspective with frequency and severity exposures, looking at those and trying to understand what's happening and what's gonna happen in this 3 to 4 month period, and how do we start coming out of it and what happens after that. But my group especially is focused on filings. So we do all of the commercial filings across the place. We interact closely with the rest of the enterprise from a personal lines perspective, as well as specialty insurance. We also do a large part is rate development. So as being part of an actuarial group, while I'm not an actuary, I have a bunch of folks that are very good at the actuarial analysis, and we put together the majority of the rate packages that we send out to all of the states when we're doing rate changes. And then what especially brings me close to AAIS is our efforts with statistical reporting. So we do all of the statistical reporting for the entire enterprise. Like I said, we are mostly a commercial group, but from an enterprise perspective, so the whole of Travelers, we do all of the statistical reporting. And so when we were probably about a year and a half ago looking at opportunities from a blockchain perspective, we started to see what AAIS was doing. And I think what we found, we had a passion for it. And then we found another entity that had even more passion than we did, passion and desire to find better ways to do some regulatory reporting and find the opportunities that will come from it after that. I think that's the great appeal. I mean, we certainly know that from a regulatory reporting perspective, there is a significant opportunity here, and we're really looking forward to engaging on that. But from there, we know that it's essentially a leaping off point for other things that we can do. So we found the kindred spirit, and we're very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it, and thanks for the kind words and showing some of the dirty laundry. Appreciate that. We're here to be agile. That's right.
Very agile.
Thank you very much. Hopefully everybody's got a good sense of where we're coming from for this panel and where we'd like to take it. So let's talk a bit about the technology that's out there today. And as you mentioned, Brian, some of the evolving priorities that may be changing how some of these things are becoming practical in our worlds and what we can bring to bear in today's age. So, Mark, technology is being deployed across our industry for a variety of different reasons. As we've mentioned, the AI, machine learning, blockchain. Are those priorities shifted in the last few months, as Brian mentioned, with respect to the technology initiatives, investments?
Well, I would say, first of all, there's this overarching theme of digital transformation, which has been underway for some time. But the pandemic has now revealed some digital gaps and has caused some reprioritization. And really, it's anything that's requiring employees to come into the office, processing inbound paper, managing manual workflows, printing checks, printing and mailing paper statements. All of those kinds of things are now revealed as digital gaps, and they're more important to address. Another way to look at it is the biggest problems that they're trying to solve with these specific technologies. I'm sorry, I still hear an echo. Me. All right. But anyway, the biggest problems, there's this bi-level transformation underway, right? So there's incremental transformation, which is about efficiency, streamlining, speed to market, all in the context of today's existing business model. So AI technologies like RPA and chatbots are important. Technologies that drive straight through processing, automated data pre-fill kinds of things, using machine learning to extract and package and analyze unstructured data, using AI for fraud. This is kind of what I call all the incremental level. But then there's also the more transformational technology, transformational level, right? Which is really where we get into some of these technologies we're talking about in a big way. So from a blockchain perspective, the early business problems we saw were in really more complex multinational kinds of areas in the business, retrocession contracts, NatCat swaps. But obviously, it's now spread to a lot of other areas, subrogation, parametric insurance, proof of insurance initiatives, and a lot of other areas. And of course, the capabilities that OpenIDL has brought to the market. To me, OpenIDL is like the poster child for blockchain and insurance, right? It's, you have sensitive data where security and privacy is paramount. The validity of the data is paramount. The way that the data is exchanged and shared is among multiple parties. Trusted third party is required that has a platform. So it's a great example of an area where we can use these technologies. And of course, as in any platform, it can be extended into other ecosystems and other use cases. And we'll talk about those, I guess, in maybe a future question coming along.
I expect we'll hit them. Thank you very much, Mark. So, and that again cues up Brian Bellendorf from Hyperledger, exactly those things. So today, with Hyperledger out there, lots of different projects, Fabric being one of them. as you hear Brian and Mark speak about the challenges facing companies as well as the technology state in the industry, what jumps out in your mind that Hyperledger can bring to the table that might be something that's ready to bring to bear?
Yeah, so an important thing to know is that at Hyperledger, what we're building is software, right? And this is software that then will get picked up by organizations and vendors and such to go and build their own networks, right? So there'll be networks targeted at different use cases, at supply chain traceability, at payments, at digital identity, and really it's left up as an exercise to the reader, so to speak, rather than taking the typical kind of blockchain approach of saying, oh, there's only one network and everybody has to plug into one. And that allows for a lot of flexibility in deciding on a policy basis, like who's a member of this network and what are the use cases we're going to support and kind of limit to. And that helps a lot with performance and authorized apps and also putting kind of a legal framework in place around access to the data and participation on the network. So within Hyperledger, we have Hyperledger Fabric, which you guys have adopted and built quite a bit around, and is terrific. It's kind of, think of it like an operating system for building blockchain applications. It's incredibly flexible. It's used across the industry for everything from tracing the flow of diamonds to make sure that they come from diamond mines that don't employ slave labor, to payment networks and payment rails for between banks. For trade finance applications, for know your customer applications. In fact, it's used at Change Healthcare for a rather large network that they've deployed for claims adjudication and authorizations for different parts of the health insurance space, basically for transforming their own kind of centralized database for routing these kinds of claims and payments into something more decentralized. It's also being used for digital identity purposes. There's a project and personal data. There's a project that Anthem has used where they've put 40 million patient records into a system that uses Hyperledger Fabric to vouch for and verify the integrity of the data that's being shared between lots of different organizations, as well as enforce privacy rules around that data. There are other code bases inside Hyperledger applicable to digital identity, applicable to performance and scalability of these different tools. Too much to go on an extensive tour here, but in a way, what we're really trying to do is wrap together the best of breed of the different technology efforts in the blockchain industry and turn that into tools and frameworks that industry can use to go and solve its problems.
Right, and I agree. It's definitely too much to go into here. I definitely encourage everybody to check out hyperledger.org and look at all the different projects, interest groups, working groups that are out there. You'll see as you look at some of the different projects, Sawtooth, Iroha, Burrow, now all the different ones that are there that are designed to interconnect blockchain networks, because one of the questions we have coming up will be around the diversity of the networks, and really it comes around trust, which is really about specificity and how it's being deployed on a mobile device, high frequency transactions, very large file sizes, all those kinds of things are all create unique conditions, just like in a computer system within a blockchain environment. So thanks, Brian. That's great detail. So Brian Hoffman at Travelers supports a variety of innovation efforts. Something I say oftentimes, there's really three kinds of technology projects: growth, innovation, or optimization, right? As Mark alluded to, a lot of those slow and steady things, but the innovation side are some of those big leaps that we might take that are going to change us, hopefully, in doing things differently. One of those innovations or investments of your time that you've made is an OpenIDL. Do you see other technologies emerging based on your own experience that they'd be impactful to your role? Outside of OpenIDL, that'll be a recurring theme here. And then as you look at those technologies, and maybe touch on the open source versus enterprise, the Linux versus Windows argument as we look back. How does Travelers look at those software technology choices and opportunities as they look at technology strategies?
Yeah, that's right on to everything that we're doing today, Truman. I think between InsurTech, between the InsurTech hubs, all the different investments that we're looking at and trying to find opportunities around how do we develop as an individual company. How do we develop the secret sauce in a better way? Because there's two aspects to the data, at least two. I'm sure there's a lot more, but just for this conversation, there's two. And like Brian Behlendorf mentioned, there's a commodity aspect to all of this data. I mean, there's so much data that flows through the insurance transaction that likely doesn't lead to anything other than an operational nightmare, right? I mean, there's so many different things that can come through that, we use it, but all the other companies in the industry do as well. And there's really nothing you can gain from being an expert in having that data flow through. But beyond that, there are those aspects of creating that secret sauce. What is the proprietary piece to the insurance transaction that we as an individual company and all other companies are interested in? And I think that's where, as Joan was talking in the earlier session about the open standards, open sources, and as we're talking about it here too, I mean, that is critical to getting to that point where various companies can, get into the pool. Everybody's contributing their data that maybe can create certain analytics, and there could be ways to mine for data. But by pushing the vast majority of it through as a commodity, which it's funny. I mean, I think for years, from an insurance industry perspective, we didn't want to admit that there are specific pieces of the commerce of insurance that's a commodity, and it just is. I mean, there's very small policies that it's a commodity. Insureds are looking for a price, and that's essentially it. We like to provide a lot more than just the price aspect to it, but there is an understanding that there are parts that are more of a commodity. So the way we can develop better and more powerful IP is through IoT, it's through telematics, and let's think about drones a little bit too. I mean, the amount of data that a drone flying over a particular property can provide to us, we take that, and we have a very large fleet of drones, and we were very early in on that, and so we can find ways to utilize that data in ways that will allow us to create that competitive advantage, as well as a speed to market for us. So yeah, I think you're right, Truman. We're looking at all different aspects. We have a whole analytics team that's constantly looking at this, and it's all about who's going to win the race, and I think we can all benefit from that race. It's not, there won't be a single winner.
So it's definitely a recurring theme. It sounds like data is important. So we see that a lot. Obviously, privacy, control, speed. The quality. I think a question came up about quality maintenance, and we'll hit that in just a second. The level of detail, the frequency, the volume of data that might be available, and really what that speaks to is the ability to use that to apply these technologies to it for one purpose or many. Is a critical component of being able to assemble this next generation. As we talk to our member companies, and certainly we've had this conversation that went very well about the first question I typically ask when I get the question is, well, okay, great, all this change sounds great, but it's really hard. How hard is it going to be for me? And my response is, how well do you know your data? And as a quote I'd like to repeat from a famous veteran of Saturday morning cartoons, Duke from G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle, right? So that's really a key piece. So to that point, Mark, our industry is really protective of its data, and certainly is a big concern in Brian's world. Policy data, privacy, policyholder data, knowledge assets, that competitive advantage, secret sauce. Want to be very much in control of that, and certainly would like to be. What do you see coming in the industry as far as popping up insurtech opportunities, services that are providing tools to the industry to better manage, control, interoperate their data? We know OpenIDL speaks to that, but what are the alternative solutions, perhaps, that if we look at it using the tools that we had yesterday, that might happen if we didn't choose to innovate?
Well, there's just this explosion of new data sources, whether it's structured or semi-structured or unstructured data, and that a lot of it has value for insurance, right? So there are lots of new insurtech companies and incumbents as well, by the way, incumbent tech companies that have rallied around that to capture and extract and aggregate and analyze that data for specific use cases in insurance, and they making it available via APIs, and it in systems that are already in there. So already there's great activity around submissions, especially in commercial lines, around underwriting, around claims, really all part of the business, right? So if I think about the big trends, it's the new data sources, it's data pre-fill to automate, it's new scores, a lot of new interesting scores, And Brian mentioned, the aerial imagery and drones. There's lots of interesting data coming in about properties, right? That, along with scores that help in underwriting. There's automated and augmented decisioning in the underwriting space. But what I'm going to share, I think is the biggest challenge for the industry, also an opportunity, of course, and that is, how do we use all these new data sources, right? So, because our industry is really based on this deep analysis of historical structured data, right? It's why the actuarial profession and the underwriting professions and others arose, right? It's the heart of the industry. But now we have real-time data. We have data that can influence behavior to manage risks. And it's all great on paper, but we don't have the history we usually like to have to be able to create new products, to underwrite them, to price them, and so on. So to me, it's a great opportunity for us to partner with insureds to manage risk better by leveraging this real-time data. But we're in early days there, right? And I think the ones that really figure out how to balance kind of the actuarial view of the world with the behavioral view of the world, and manage risk better from a real-time standpoint are the ones that are going to be the real winners in the future era.
Great, thanks. And so Brian Bellendorf on the Hyperledger sounds like from your description is really geared towards managing exactly the problems that Mark just outlined, all this data coming from different sources and different patterns, and the need to be able to rely on that, not only know it's there, but know it's something you can count on for these different questions. So as Hyperledger matures, when Hyperledger is successful, say we did it, done, drop the mic, what's it look like inside of an insurance company, and what could they do? What kind of value could they provide when this is working as we envision?
Right. Well, there is this whole emerging field of blockchain design that I think is, and blockchain architecture for your applications and for your system uses of it, that I don't think is all that different from database architecture. When SQL databases were new, and you still had to think about the geometry of data as it's being written to spinning disks, hard drives and things like that. It was a real art and a real science to build a database system that could hit the kind of performance needs that you had, and the scale of the data and that sort of thing. And with blockchain systems, perhaps counterintuitively, it's really best to not treat them as a big data tool, as a data lake or things you just throw everything into. If anything, it's a small batch artisanal data tool. It's like the pieces that you really only want to guarantee are the pieces everybody has witnessed and everybody's agreed to, and really need to be shared amongst the set of organizations. And the kind of first tier of that is simply as a data sharing platform to be able to say, here's a hash of a document that is the proof, say, if I'm filing if a claim has been filed around a car crash, here's a hash of the photo, not the full photo, but a hash of that to prove that when two parties are talking about, here's a car crash, here's a photo of the crash, that is a legitimate photo that was actually created at a certain time and by a certain person. And then there's a second tier that will be around process integration, around being able to create essentially smart contracts and agreements that say, if we're an insurance company and then a reinsurance company, given a set of conditions, a set of constraints, but also a set of things that happen, register new entries on the ledger that record the movement of value or the existence of a thing that then everybody witnesses and agrees to. Right. One of my canonical examples is a weather insurance agreement that a farmer enters into with an insurance company that agrees to pay them out if there's been a disastrous low amount of rainfall in a given year. That could actually be expressed as a smart contract in a way that removes the counterparty risk for both the farmer and the insurance provider. And I think broadly stated across the industry, this is a way to automate so many processes that today depend upon both human involvement and signatures on paper and regulatory approval and kind of a slow system that really could help automate, professionalize that, and squeeze a lot of the inefficiencies out.
Great, thanks. And so this speaks, I think, exactly to where we're trying to go. So Brian, as the data guy here on the company side, what are the things you'd like to see that you would need as you look at to fulfill that data strategy? Do you see a different data strategy emerging? And we got a question coming in from the audience that I'll kind of pile on to this with. What do you see, and if blockchain is a part of it, what do you see as being the next innovation? And is there something coming that you might see over the next 6 to 9 months to support that strategy?
So not sure if it's within 6 to 9 months, and I'd say I'm not going to have all the specific answers, but I know that the experience through utilizing OpenIDL is going to provide tremendous amounts of opportunity. So let's go back to what Mark was mentioning a minute ago, as far as the real-time data. Think about the product innovation that's going to create. So I'll get a little wonky here. So think about some of the bulletins that we've seen from some of the insurance departments. Critical that they understand, what does loss frequency, what does exposure currently look like in the COVID days. So many companies going and providing some discounts to personal auto, some on business owners, some taking it even further into commercial auto. So the question is, how do you take that data? How do you find a way to have that data to create these real-time products? And so going a little bit deeper, think about the mileage-based products that are now out there. So there's been some insurtech that has created mileage-based insurance, and from that aspect, if you were a customer of one of those companies and you had the mileage-based policy, you're not paying anything during this time, where your car is basically sitting in the garage, sitting, in the driveway, wherever it may be. You're not utilizing it. So there's a tremendous benefit from this incredible flow of data that we're starting to and will really start to take advantage of in the next, call it 6 to 12 to 18 months or so. That's going to drive some product innovation that we've probably never seen before. We do see, a lot of insurtech startups doing certain things that are a little bit different, but, I think the incumbents, the larger carriers as well, starting to really think through that, because there is tremendous opportunity to provide a new product. And as we do that, privacy is going to be critical. I mean, there's so much of this data that keeps flowing through, and that as an industry we're accepting. We just have to be very cautious from that privacy perspective. But I would also offer that through that privacy effort, I think you also can gain some efficiencies as you create standards, and the efficiencies will also help with a speed to market perspective.
Great, thanks. And I think that speaks exactly to it, that in order to maintain privacy, we've got to have a common data strategy for a purpose. I want to touch on one question that came in. How do you quantify or validate data entered into a blockchain, with insurance data having so many variables? And I think we could probably all answer it. And I want to volunteer as a place to start. And I kind of actually throw it back to you real quick, Brian. One of the reasons I think we're getting some traction is that we're very specific in what we're doing. With OpenIDL, is that does one thing, does what you do, does what AAIS does. So that gives us the framework with which to act quickly, even if it's of it's a narrow focus, but of specific impact. When we're trying to solve boil the ocean sorts of problems, that's when things become very difficult, right? Because you have to take care of and empathize with an infinite number of stakeholders, which creates a how long is a piece of string sort of problem. So any comments on that for folks in disagreement, or I want to try and get some of those questions in there, because we're covering some ground here.
No, I think that is spot on, Truman. The use case is critical here, and the fact that we're starting with the regulatory reporting side, I think that always held a great appeal to us. Like I had said earlier, as we started, finding an opportunity for a blockchain application was something that we were looking for. And we don't want to find, like you said, a way to boil the ocean. We want to find a particular segment of the industry that we think has the best opportunity for success. In a sense, it's not necessarily a test bed, but in some ways it is. I mean, this is a way that we're going to use, as we said earlier, it's kind of a jumping off point. What do we do after this? There are plenty of opportunities, but we do have to keep focused. We don't want to have that scope creep. We want to make sure we keep the curbs up and make sure we're going down the lane that we've established as regulatory reporting for this. There will be plenty of opportunities to come from it, but staying focused first is very important.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go to Brian Bellendorf on this one, because I think as we talk about these data infrastructure thing and the mechanisms, the software that we're deploying to manage this increasingly private, timely data, governance of those networks and how that software is deployed, the management of it, who makes those rules once they sign on for it, can those rules change? Those things are really important. So talk a bit about the governance of these processes and how that's really important as we deploy these, these increasingly automated, increasingly trusted solutions.
Yeah, well, there's a piece of this that looks very much like a standards effort, right? Where getting parties who want to exchange information to agree on the data formats and agree on the language that they're going to use to express smart contracts if they're going to do that sort of thing, as well as what is the underlying plumbing that we're going to each run a node for, and that in this case is Hyperledger Fabric, but even then the question is, well, which version of it, and then there's kind of an operational aspect to it too, which is when do we coordinate our efforts to do an upgrade that might be disruptive, or how do we coordinate to make sure it's less disruptive for folks, and then there's questions about how do we work together on some common software? So, for example, even on top of the framework that you might choose, like Fabric, there's probably going to be a need to build some common chain code, as it's called, that everybody agrees to run, that automates certain baseline processes that are built in, that everyone expects, right? So part of that looks like an open source software development exercise, and that is something where the governance of those types of both that and standards, it very much looks and feels like a duocracy, very much when it's done right. You really let those who have a clear sense of what needs to be built work together transparently in front of the rest. And then there's a third element, which is really more operational, right? If we do need to do an upgrade that might be disruptive, or do need to make a choice about how to fix a bug that has now caused some poor behavior on this, how do we coordinate our technical efforts so that on August 1st, we all are running a new version of the software? Or even from a legal point of view, there is a bug and it caused somebody to lose money or some incorrect entries to be written to the ledger. Now we need to coordinate on a corrective action for that. And that is this hybrid of conversations about technology, conversations about policy, conversations about legal, but at the end result of it, it's manifested in what is written on the blockchain and installed on the nodes on the network. So it's necessarily this hybrid. And the best format we know to do these things is just through conversation, through mediated engagement with the participants on the network. Sometimes it even needs to be face-to-face if we can ever get back to that again, hopefully so. But at the very least, frequent and transparent and collaborative conversations. And then finally, frankly, the more of that you can do publicly, right? Publicly might simply mean to a wider audience than even just are engaged on the blockchain network. But a wider set of stakeholders, the more likely it is that you're going to arrive at the best decision.
Thanks. So Mark, looking across the industry, do you see places that these open source technologies and that sort of governance that allows the conditions for the rising tide, if you will, to help the industry, that might apply more readily across the industry?
Yeah, I think there's certain areas where open source options are absolutely taking hold, especially, certainly tech companies that are building solutions are already taking advantage of open source capabilities. There's a great deal going on in the whole machine learning world regarding open source capabilities that people are tapping into. I frankly don't see mainstream insurers adopting open source solutions yet for their mission critical solutions. I mean, there are components that are leveraged by their solution providers, the platform providers, where they've incorporated open source components into there, but I don't see them building their own yet. Now, an interesting thing to watch is, you've probably seen the recent announcement of Allianz making their ABS platform available via open source mechanisms, right? They use it across all of their enterprises worldwide, but it's going to be interesting to see if other insurers decide to use that for the mainstream policy billing core kinds of solutions. But I think as I take a broader view, these new ecosystems continue to evolve, right? And especially around areas like smart home and connected vehicles and and those kinds of areas. And open source platforms are going to become more important because partnering is becoming more dynamic. The exchange data with parties that you never dreamed you'd exchange data with before is becoming, more a part of the whole value chain and the equation. And so I see the potential to create all these series of interconnected networks, right, exchanging data, in secure ways. So, and I think there's a big role to play there.
Exactly what Vint and Joan were talking about before, I think. So Brian Hoffman at Travelers, in your role as one of the largest small business insurers in the country and working with these businesses that are in a variety of different areas, is that a strategy and a pattern you see moving forward such that you can become more, as we say at AAIS, intimate with our members and you intimate with your policyholders to help them better manage their risk in ways, as I often say, between the quote and the claim?
Absolutely. Great future for all of that, I think, Truman. Thinking about even from an app perspective, how do we take the Amazon functionality, how well people favor anything that comes from Amazon. How do you take that and find more ways to insert that into the insurance transaction? It just has to happen. I mean, I know. I think Mark mentioned the parametric insurance. That's a great opportunity there. I mean, when things just happen and suddenly the insured receives some sort of payment in their checking account, in their savings account, in their PayPal, whatever it may be. However, we can do that and become, in your words, Truman, more intimate with our stakeholders. It's the best thing for everybody. And I will say, mentioning stakeholders, it's not even just our policyholders, it's the community that we serve too. I mean, the different things that we can do just from being a good corporate citizen is important. I mean, that's where the benefit comes. That again, not that we're always looking for a secret sauce, but being able to interact closely with the community is a big part of how we are now viewing success. I mean, it's very important. So as we continue down the path of finding ways to work closer with our insureds and closer with our community, it's all about the data. The data is going to serve us. I mean, we can send out updates on particular weather events that are occurring. What do we see coming, or anything. It is the intimacy is going to be very important in the future.
Great. Well, thanks. And I think we're getting close to the end of our time. So if there's any other questions last from the audience, I'd invite you to submit those, and we'll try and get to them. And we'll do a bit of a round robin. Brian Bellendorf, I'd like to start with you. Of all these things we're talking about, is there something that may have changed your mind even over the course of this last 45 minutes that might lead to an accelerated release and really to help get some alignment and bring some of the folks here today together to solve maybe that one problem that we're all dancing around?
Yeah, no, there already is quite a bit of use of Hyperledger Fabric out there and other Hyperledger technologies in supply chain efforts around getting PPEs from reliable sources more quickly to the people who need them. But there's a substantial amount of work going on now around thinking about credentials related to immunizations and antibodies tests and other forms of proving immunity to be able to help people in very health-sensitive environments get back to work or places to be able to, allow for international travel, that sort of thing. So the digital identity and really what's called self-sovereign identity efforts happening out there are building on top of a lot of technologies we've been building on and pioneering in Hyperledger Indy and Hyperledger Aries. I'd point interested folks over at a site called covidcreds.com, which is a whole bunch of entities in this community organizing around the use cases and a go-to-market strategy around getting adoption of digital identity devices that actually preserve privacy, preserve agency on the part of the holders of those credentials, and might actually help us reopen society more quickly. So lots of activity in that space.
Yeah, digital identity to me is a really pivotal next step for us. And I think the COVID opportunity presents a very unique opportunity to take the technology we're using to manage our stuff, our cars, our houses, our laptops, what have you, moving it towards the individual identities through programs like, insurance products like work comp, but that starts to get in there. Now when a property casualty industry, as a restaurant owner or even a human walking around trying to understand my risk, that personal information is now part of our liability exposures. Who do you let into your restaurant? Who do we let onto the field for each sports team is a question I'm facing in another one of the communities in which I belong, to which I belong. So Mark, as we look across the industry and seeing these things materializing, what are your last words of things where people might look to prepare themselves for these kinds of changes, again, looking towards the rest of the year and what has been a dramatically revised 2020?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that we see insurers facing, actually before the pandemic, but even more so now, is just that there's this enormous potential, right? Technology is reshaping the world. There's all kinds of use cases in insurance. And so the challenge always is, okay, how do I even absorb all of this? How do I understand the different possibilities? How does it align to my business strategy? What should I do? How should I move forward, right? So, and this is a lot of what we do at SMA, right, is to help filter and to help, get beyond just theorizing about the possibilities, but, looking at the business model, the culture, the strategy of individual companies and saying, all right, what technologies, what insurtechs, what existing partners you have, what business problems can you solve through working with these partners, right, and leveraging different technologies. So to me, I think that's the biggest advice I would give is, don't get, mired in checking every insurtech out there and doing all the theory and pilots all over the place. Really start from a business strategy standpoint, the business problems you're trying to solve, the opportunities you see, and then work through, how do we align, the potential out there with certain partners and certain platforms and certain technologies.
That's exactly right. I believe, the aligning and empathizing with the other stakeholders, defining the why, starting with why, again, some of these agile principles that we try and live by really help clarify and be able to cut through the noise when delivering these solutions. So Brian Hoffman, I would like to end it with you as kind of the guest of honor, our newest member and the customer on this panel, if you will. So, but also would like to, kind of invite you to speak to some of the reasons in the communities that we're talking about that, this is a team sport. It's better together. We're going to be able to have the transformational impact, to really change our industry only when we've got a critical mass of folks willing to do that and being able to trust in this next generation. So I'd kind of open it up to you and see if there's any advice you might offer to the other folks in our community to get on a bus.
Sure. So first of all, I'm honored and humbled to be on this panel because it is a great panel. So again, thanks for inviting me and for having us as one of your members. It's great to be here. I think as we really look at this, it's all about changing the paradigm. I mean, today, the regulatory regimes, and not using that in a derogatory sense, but they're very reactionary. And being reactionary never leads to speed to market, efficiencies, a better product for our customers. It makes it more difficult. So I think really, if I think about this, we really are looking to change that paradigm to make this a more proactive approach to utilizing and accessing data. It has to be permissioned, and we have to make sure that privacy is always at the forefront. But in order to really take the industry forward, we need to help regulators as well as the industry members find better ways to access and utilize the data. And I really believe OpenIDL through blockchain is that great opportunity. Just one quick example, just literally this morning, we had to stand up a group to respond to a New Jersey bulletin that's looking for all the information about all the exposures that are variable, and do companies need to start giving money back, change exposures, do different things. So a data call is required, and so we have to stand up the group to get that. We have to go through all of our sources of data to make sure we have it. We need to build it, put it together, and multiply that by the number of companies in the industry. Where what we're talking about here is establishing those open standards with permissioned access so that regulators essentially can say, I would like to see this, this, and this, and all the company has to do is say yes or no. So it is hugely powerful. And so I'm going to stick with that. We've got to change this paradigm and get to more proactive regulatory approach to data.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brian. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Mark Breeding from Strategy Meets Action, Brian Bellendorf from the Hyperledger Foundation, and Brian Hoffman from the Travelers. Remember, you can check out this session, the recording, on the virtual main event library after today's program. We'll have that up as soon as possible. And we'll be back at the top of the hour with a closer look at IoT and the use of sensors in the modern home with leaders from NEOS, CFM, and Roost. Don't miss that. And don't miss your chance to win a great prize over at the Virtual Vendor Marketplace today, sponsored by Guy Carpenter. Thanks very much for joining.